Good evening, everyone. Hi. And I forgot to ask Tim if this is already on. Hopefully it is. All right. Well, welcome to our evening. And as soon as I can find the mouse, we will get started. There we go. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Good. What's that?
Awesome title.
Oh, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. And there is a very intentional purpose behind it, and you'll find out by the end of the evening. We'll cover that for sure. We're here because we know that leadership isn't just born. It can also be developed as a skill and a capability. And so that's why we're here tonight. There's a lot of stuff to cover, and we'll give you a great overview, but we might be moving a bit quickly. It's a bit of a sprint. I think some of you working in startups are accustomed to that, so hopefully it'll be just fine. All right. So just a little bit about me. Roger did a great job introducing me. Thank you so much. A little bit about my background, but just my role tonight, really, you have to see this as me being your facilitator. This is my background. This is what brought me here, and this is why I'm interested in the work that I do. And in the startup space, it's primarily around founders with mission, vision, value, purpose, road mapping, scale up. But I work with organizations of all different sizes and maturity levels. Okay. So I thought the first thing I do is to get you up off your seats. So what brought you here? And what I mean by that is not your car, is what drew you to come here tonight to this. All right. There's always a lot of options, a lot of things you can do around this space. What is it that brought you here? Maybe it was the title. Thank you. But I want you to take a minute to think about it. And then when you're ready, walk around, introduce yourself by name only. So what I want to start out with is it's not about titles and our backgrounds and our qualifications. Tonight, we're all the same. We're all learners. We're in this shared experience together. So I would say stay away from, status-seeking type of introductions and more around, hey, why are we here together tonight and what brings us together? So I'm going to ask you to think about what brought you here and walk around the room, talk to people, and then group yourselves around your number one reason for being here. I'm just curious. So if you could take a minute, and this will get you up off your seats after eating and also give me a second to get settled in. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. Great. So what are some commonalities you had? What are some things that drew you to tonight? I'm curious.
You.
Thank you, Gloria. You flatter me. Any other things? A little bit of market research here to make a point earlier. Go ahead.
Learning about leadership.
Learning about leadership. Yep. Anything else?
Building a startup and wanting to be very intentional about culture.
Great. Love hearing that. Absolutely. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to do a quick poll too. And you guys are really good at talking to each other. And so just so you know, if you stay to the very end, we're going to have a highly interactive exercise with the entire group. So that'll be our last exercise. You'll have plenty of time to get to know each other after. A quick poll here around, just in the interest of time, helping me to get to know you as a group. How many founders are here? Just a show of hands. Okay, entire team. So here with a team member. Yeah, with a team. Okay, first-time entrepreneurs. Okay, so about maybe 30% of the room. Worked for big companies. Okay, a good group here. How about this one? Ever worked for anybody else before? So have you only ever been the boss, or have you ever worked for somebody? So people have worked for somebody before. Okay, great. Hey, believe me, there are people that haven't. So, and then stage of company, seed stage or pre-seed. Why don't we say that? Pre-seed, seed. Okay, A. Okay. B. Okay. I'm seeing multiple votes here. Anything beyond B? Okay. All right, that's just a good gauge for me to know who's in the room, so thank you for that. All right, let me just tell you why we're here tonight. Okay, so the objective here is to leave here more knowledgeable leaders than when we came in. That's it. Very simple. And what I mean by that is better in knowledge, in your thinking, your behaviors, and hopefully your actions from here on out. Okay, so that's our learning objective tonight. Why is this important? So as founders, you have a huge influence on the success of your business, right? I said that in the preview video. The survival and growth of your business depends on your decisions, your leadership. And that's why it's so important to understand that your leadership is the start of the culture at your company, and it could make all the difference in the world. Okay, so that's why this is all important. And it's something that I think you would agree not everyone thinks about. So in this room is a special group of people that are going to have an edge on those that totally ignore this stuff. All right, so let me just get through a couple of overviews around just what to expect tonight, and then we'll dig right into it, okay? So just a mindset to level set everything here. This is a shared learning experience. It's not a lecture, it's not a class, it's not even a presentation, even though I'm using a presentation. You have to see this as something that you're in this room, and this combination of people are never going to be in the same place again, ever. All right, so this is an experience that you're sharing here tonight that's going to be different and unique, and everything you bring here, including yourself and what others bring to the table, is going to be special. So really see this more as a shared experience. When we walk out of here, we're going to have this in common, and we're going to be a little bit different for it, okay? I want you to trust the process. So everything here is done on purpose. So from content to structure to sequence to speed, all of this is really intentionally built toward getting to a conclusion at the end. So even if things feel a little bit you're not sure of, or you're not feeling comfortable, it means it's working, right? We're here to push your boundaries a little bit, to help you think about things a little bit differently than you have before, to introduce concepts that you may not have encountered, right? So that's all part of learning. If everything was familiar to you, you'd be bored, first of all, and second, it wouldn't be a good use of your time. So we want to make sure that we stretch ourselves here tonight. And in that spirit, we want you to be present. So consider this, and this is at the risk of sounding cheesy, consider this a serious conversation with somebody else, and that person is you. All right, so you don't want to be distracted by your phones or what's going on and what fire is burning, and it's trying to take you away from here. That erodes your experience for yourself and the people around you. So I'm just going to ask that you be present. And then some expectations: you get out what you put in. Right? So the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of tonight. Expect that we're going to do a lot of thinking, a lot of activities to make sure you get that full experience. And you'll be able to practice a lot of new behaviors coming out of here. You get to focus on topics in new and different ways, as I already talked about it, so I won't beat a dead horse there. And there's only so much we can cover here today. Leadership is a huge topic. One of the biggest challenges I had in preparing for tonight was to be able to curate what to cover, just because there's such a broad breadth and depth around this topic, and so relevant to startups. And really, you have to consider tonight a bit of an appetizer before your big meal as you dig right into your leadership. Okay? And lastly, it only works if you go back over and over again. So you're going to have materials, and I'll go through that in a second. You come here, you take your papers, you throw them in your drawer or in the trash, and you never get back to it. You're not going to get the learning out of here. It only works if this continues after tonight. So I want to set that expectation up front. So some quick norms about how we want to work together tonight. I want you to express your curiosity by asking questions. Encourage it in others. I know that's not everyone's comfort level, but we're all friends here, right? And we're intended to create a safe space for all of you to experiment and to test out new concepts and questions that maybe you don't get to ask in other scenarios. In that respect, you want to make sure that people feel that they can have a turn. So total engagement without dominating the conversation. Also, I need to get through only so much stuff tonight, so we may need to finish things afterwards. Be intentional and transparent. Seek your clarification when needed. Make this a safe environment. All this, I'm speeding through it, but that doesn't mean it's not important. I want you to understand that we want to take this really seriously. So all of us are responsible for making this a successful night. We want to make sure there's one conversation at a time because my voice only carries so far. And I want your feedback for each other to be constructive. So is there anything missing here? Was I that thorough? Oh, great, great. And is this something that we can all agree and commit to tonight? Great. So let me go through housekeeping here. And we saved a little bit of time. Thank you to Kea and Levi for helping me distribute all the materials on your seats. Let me just cover what you have in, oh, and I'm sorry to be, can I just grab a side here? Let me just cover what you have in your seats so you're not sitting here curious the whole night. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is this sheet here. This is your personal development plan. I'm going to ask you to revisit this throughout the night, but hopefully by the time you leave here, you've got something to start with, a draft that will really help you focus and personalize your journey as a leader. So that's the first thing. The workbook, we're actually going to build while we go through this, all right? So the content that you bring to the workbook, that'll be your resource going out of here, you're gonna co-create it with me. And in the back, you should have 3 post-it notes. That'll be for the last exercise. So and this, we will have a nice set of cards here. I'd like these back if you don't mind. You won't need it after we go through it, but this will be for one of our activities. So you can set that aside and you'll know exactly, don't worry, you'll find out. But just wanted to make sure everyone has this. No one's missing anything, correct? Okay. You are?
No, favor to ask, are there any extra pens?
Extra pens. I have a few myself. Anybody else need it? Catch.
Yeah.
Catch. Pass it around. Can I have these back too? Here you go. Thank you. Okay. Any questions with housekeeping? Just setting the stage. Okay. So here's the big reveal now. Okay. Top reasons founders get fired. All right. So in 2016, there was a Reddit thread. How many among you use Reddit regularly? Hey. Okay. So there was a thread in 2016 about why founders get fired. Business Insider picked it up and reported the top reasons. So they went through everything in that discussion. They picked out all the top reasons, and these are them. So I'll give you a second to read that. Any of these surprise you? Okay. So, doesn't sound like any surprises, but go ahead.
I don't think they had a bad board that made bad decisions as a reason that they got fired.
Yeah? You think there's something else behind that?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Maybe. These are, Reddit users, so. These are self-reported. Go ahead.
Oh, it was just a comment.
Yeah?
Well, the bottom right, I thought was pretty interesting.
Absolutely. Isn't that interesting? I mean, I was fascinated by this discussion. When you look closer upon all of this, right, and if you organize these reasons, it actually sorts out to 3 main categories. Awareness, capability, and change. These are the 3 real reasons founders get fired. So I didn't keep you waiting for too long there to find out, right? So any questions so far? Okay. So accordingly, since these are the 3 main reasons, we are going to cover concepts, tools, and skills that address each of these and hopefully prevent them. Okay, these are the topics we will touch upon tonight in this order. Okay, awareness, capability, and change. Why? Because if you don't know what you don't know, you can't fix it, right? And if you don't understand what you're good at from a capability standpoint and what you're not good at or what you still need to learn, you have to have the awareness first, and then you have to know what the gap is, right? And then lastly, you need to make sure that you evolve and become a better leader. That's the change part. And that's not temporarily. That's long-term. It becomes a part of who you are, and it's long-term throughout your career. Okay, so I'll help you understand change at the individual level and provide you tools on how that will develop your capability to change for the better. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to do. Okay, so under awareness, we will talk about emotional intelligence, primarily focusing on self-awareness. Authentic leadership begins with a deep understanding of who you are. So we're going to do a lot of exercises that involve yourself, okay? There'll be a lot more team-based work in our next workshop, so make sure that you keep your ear out for that. But a lot of individual work tonight to focus on your own personal leadership journey. When we cover capability, we're going to cover decision-making, managing the unsolvable, and I'll explain that later, and self-care. And what I mean by that is decision-making is around making sure, obviously, you're making the right decisions. And I know it's really easy to second-guess yourself and question what you're doing and what the outcomes will be. There's a lot of unknowns, especially in startups. We'll talk about how to up your skill level and comfort level in decision-making. And then on the self-care side, it really has to do with your ability to weather all the ups and downs. Has anyone seen that cartoon about a roller coaster about startup life? It's your ability. So if you're running on empty, if you're burned out, i.e., that's going to affect your performance, right? So self-care is a huge part of making sure you're leading from a place of strength. So we'll be covering that as well. Any questions? Okay. Okay. So before we get into it, let's set the stage. Startup leadership is different. So what that means is what worked before elsewhere may not work in another context. And I saw the hands that went up, and there were a lot of you have worked for bigger companies before, and what works in that context may not work in the startup context. What happened in your previous startup may not be the same in your current startup, okay? The context is different, and so it's really important to understand right off the bat, startup leadership is different, and it's different in every different context, okay? So there's more certainty and uncertainty and ambiguity. Is that true? False? Okay. More potential for greater growth and quicker turnaround with outcomes, right? We talk about hyper growth, right? Scale up. Those things happen like crazy fast. I mean, double, triple, quadrupling the size of your company in a series of sometimes even weeks or a couple of months. So that doesn't happen in large companies, at least not in that capacity. There's less structure, and for sure, less resources, which is why something like Access Silicon Valley, which provides a resource for founders, these are such important aspects of the ecosystem because the resources just aren't there within an individual startup. This whole aspect of let the market decide means like your business is so new, there's so much that's unknown and nothing can measure from that the only way to validate is to put it out in the market and see what happens and make sure the fit is there, right? And when it's hard, it's important to have the vision or the why to rely on as a safety net during difficult times. It's hard day to day when you're making those calls and trying to hustle, either for customers or funders. It's hard to really realize what you're doing and why. You can forget that really easily. So this is the really important part, is understanding why you're doing this, why are you suffering like this. It's for a good reason, and that you have a vision for where you want to go. And that's really important when you communicate that to other people as well. Any questions? Okay. So let me address a couple of proverbial elephants in the room when it comes to startup leadership. Okay. First, investors invest based on their assessment of the founders. That's the big elephant in the room. Okay? So what does that mean? Here's a quote. Anyone read this book, Secrets of Sand Hill Road? It just came out. Okay, Scott Kapoor says, qualitative evaluations dwarf quantitative ones, and they generally fall into three categories: people, product, and market, in that order. Right, you see? So people is first on the list, and this is not just one VC's opinion. This is actually confirmed by research done out of Harvard Business School, and it talks about early stage company having, no substantial assets, that investors can really assess. You're starting something from the ground up. So therefore, potential investors seek to reduce uncertainty before investing by assessing the skills of the executive team, in particular, the founder and the CEO, and the quality of the business idea and the business model and the trajectory of the market that the company is targeting. So this is not just one opinion. A lot of research says this is how investors decide how they want to invest. It's based on their personal assessment on you, qualitative. Okay. Elephant number 2. You will move on one day and be replaced. Okay. And that's assuming that every company here will survive and succeed. That's my assumption. But one day you will move on and be replaced. That's the other elephant in the room. Okay. Why? Because your job will increase in complexity, requiring different additional skills. That means there's a leader for every season in a company, and it might not be you. And the research, the same thing out of Harvard Business School, this guy named Wasserman, said there's 2 inflection points in the life of a startup where the chances of turning over a CEO founder is higher. It's 1, the completion of a product development, typically the first offering, and second, when you raise a new round. Why? Successfully completing product development means that the needs of the company shifts at that point. Once the product is out, there's a different capability that needs to happen. And so actually what they say is the best performing companies that actually get to the product sooner have the likelihood to replace the CEO founder sooner as well than even worse performing companies. So isn't that interesting? And then when it comes to, let's talk about raising of a new round. Why do you think that is? Results of due diligence. You know this. Some of you have gone through these rounds. The investors often require the company's management team to address what they perceive to be weaknesses, right? And sometimes that list of weaknesses is out of the CEO, right? And so when a company becomes a startup, starts to get really desperate for capital, who knows what that's like, right? Then they're more willing to accede to the demands of those that can fund them, right? So that's another inflection point when a CEO founder would move on. It's during the raising of a new round. So the key is this, not to stress you guys out, but the key is this, is knowing when change is necessary and leaving on your own terms. Okay, that's what I want to help enable you to understand. Any questions so far? I want to get through this part faster. Anyone read this book? No? It's pretty good. There's 5 essential entrepreneurial leadership skills. I won't go through them in the interest of time, but guess what? They map right back to this: awareness, capability, and change. Ties right back to those top 3 reasons founders get fired. So what are you left to do? I just set you the landscape, and you might have mixed feelings about it right now. Where does that leave you? Well, this book says to lead others, you must first lead yourself, and leading yourself requires that you must realistically understand your capabilities. So that's why the first thing we're going to work on here is awareness. And it's not just awareness of self, it's awareness of others as well. That's also a key skill. So, pop quiz. How much does EQ influence performance? So EQ is emotional intelligence. Any guesses? 90%? You said 6? 60. Oh, okay. You want to make it higher? 95%. Any other guesses? You can go lower too. Go 10, all right. 37. Any other guesses? 58%. This is actually in general, leaders in general, 58%. This came out of Emotional Intelligence 2.0, that book. And what they say is EQ is so critical to success that it accounts for 58% of performance in all types of jobs. It is the single biggest predictor of performance in the workplace and the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. Wow, that's a mouthful, isn't that interesting? So what do we mean by emotional intelligence? It's your ability to, one, recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships. You actually have to have both parts. So even if you're aware and it doesn't change how you behave, that's not emotional intelligence. Okay, so you have to make sure you have both. By the way, and I just came off another presentation, it was yesterday, on the future of work. EQ is a necessary skill in the future of work because this is a human trait that can't be automated. Think about that. No computer can replace this job right here. Okay? So far. As far as we can see. So in this book, they cover the key EQ skills, and these are the four of them: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And what we're going to focus on tonight, because again, there's only so much time, is self-awareness. Any questions about any of these? You know what they all mean? Okay. So let me just explain self-awareness since we're spending more time with it. It's your ability to accurately perceive your own emotions in the moment and understand your tendencies across situations. So self-awareness includes staying on top of your typical reactions to specific events, challenges, and people even. And to understand this, you must know who you are. So that's why it comes to this question of who am I? And who you are is made up of elements like these: values, motivations, identity, purpose, experiences. Am I missing anything? Think about who you are. Anything else that might make up who you are?
Integrity.
Integrity, that might be a value, perhaps? IQ? You mean intelligence?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think people's networks are extraordinarily.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. And that might fold into some of your experiences as well with people, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's where we get to the I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let's talk about values, because you just mentioned integrity. If I asked you right now, could you list off all your values, your personal values, off the top of your head right now? So some yeses, some nos. All right, I'm going to help you. Before you even need to memorize that list, I'm going to help you get to that list. How about that? Okay, so you have cards at your seats. Now, by the way, I didn't make these cards up. These come from academic and market research on personal core values. Okay, and there's several sources if any of you are curious about it, because some of them are actually coming out of the consumer research field, for those of you who have consumer products. So what I want you to do right now is to separate this across your laps in 4 different piles. One is does not describe me at all. Wish I were more like this. This describes me the most, and not sure. And when I talk about values, I'm not talking about aspirational. Okay, I'm talking about who you are now, core to who you are now. Okay? We'll talk about aspirational later, but think about what is it that truly describes you the most. So that's that third bullet there is really what I want you to focus on. Do a sorting exercise, narrow it down to 5 to 7. And I'll give you 5 minutes. Sound good?
What do we sort down to 7?
This describes me the most. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm going to put my timer on here. I can mention it if I can get it to work. And when you have the 5 to 7 down, you actually have the first page in your workbook where you can write those down. Sure.
The second one, you shall learn more like this about the values you either have them or don't have them.
Yeah.
You know, you either believe in this or don't believe in it.
Right. Right.
So, what does you shall
So
learn?
it's the second and third are really adjacent to each other, because the ones that describe you the most are going to be higher in ranking than anything you wish you were more like, right? Because that's more aspirational. So what I'm trying to get you to narrow down is that which is the most important aspects of who you are today, not what you wish you were more like. But it is important for you to understand what is in that second category. You have a personal development plan that you're helping. So if you want to develop a different type of value or trend towards something, you have your development plan at your seat that you can use to write that down. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, great. You're welcome.
Is it common to have a lot of aspirational?
Absolutely. It's great to have aspirations. That should be a fortune cookie, Roger. Okay, we've got 2.5 minutes left. We're halfway through. How are you guys doing? Another minute?
We're supposed to take 7 from this describes me the most?
Yes, 5 to 7. And then write that on your first worksheet. Should be the first page on your workbook there. Remember, it's a sprint. Raise your hand if you need more time. Okay, let's do a couple more minutes then. So once you have it down, write that in your workbook, because I'm taking your cards back at the end of the night. You can keep the piles as they are. They might help you with your development plans. And also, if I'm missing anything from the list, everyone has at least one blank card. Anyone need it? That's good. Means I covered it.
Sorry, so you put these in 4 stacks and then you're supposed to write on the top 5% of the back.
Yes, the third bullet. This describes me the most. Yes.
Okay, right exactly where?
On the first page of your workbook, so the thicker packet. No, the thicker packet that you have.
Oh, okay.
Yes. You're welcome. All right. How you doing? All done? So again, you see how this is so personal to an individual to each of you. So if anyone ever has to ask you, maybe it's an interview question, then you can just rattle these off the top of your head. If they want to know who you are, it's these values. Okay? So we're going to move on to the next one, okay? With me? Okay, great. Next one is your identity, right? Who's seen this before? It's an eye chart, I know. I'll explain it. Okay, this is what's typically called a diversity wheel. But it is really good at helping create a visual around who a person might be from their identity standpoint. So there's different layers to your identity. And so that's all represented by the rings around the circle here. So at the very core, it's your personality that's unique to you. But each of these different rings, which include internal dimensions, so those are internal, you'll start to see here, age, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, ethnicity, and race. Those are non-negotiable. You can't change that about yourself, okay? The next layer is external dimensions. This layer is one that you can affect. These are choices that you make in your life that has an impact on your experiences and who you are. So what you see here are things like marital status, geographic location, income, personal habits, recreational habits, religion and spirituality, educational background, work experience, appearance, and parental status. Those are decisions that you make in your life that become your external dimensions of your identity. And then that last circle is the organizational dimensions. That's the context in which you work, right? And those are only somewhat within your control. For those of you that are startup founders and CEOs, you have more control over that piece. But in a larger organization, there are things maybe that are in your control or less in your control. So things like your management status, your functional level or classification, your work content or your field, your division, department, group, seniority, work location, union affiliation. Those are aspects that are part of one's identity at work and then within an organization that may or may not be within their full ability to control. So you also have a worksheet for that in your workbook. It's the second page. I'm going to give you another 5 minutes to just jot down what aspects are salient. What I mean by salient is what's stronger in your identity when it comes to each of these dimensions. So you have a blank version of this in your second page of your book, workbook, so to speak. Take 5 minutes, jot those things down, and I'll start the timer.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
So for example, for internal dimensions, like when you look at age, race, and we can pick which of those are strongest.
Yeah. So what are those aspects, those pieces that form your personal identity?
And are we only doing internal dimensions, or are we doing all three?
So in your workbook, you'll see you have all 3 rings there, and you just fill those out on the sheet. I know, I wish I had bigger sheets of paper for it, so there's not a lot of room to write, but go ahead. I'm not going to limit you to that. I mean, if you want to just test yourself and say, okay, what's really most important to me when it comes to the diversity wheel, great. But I just want you to take a quick second to think through what's really strongest for you.
From what's in these circles, right?
You don't have to choose from that. You could just name what's important to you and who you are as a person, your personal identity. So I don't want to be too prescriptive. These are just really just for illustrative purposes, what makes up each dimension. Okay? And again, only write down what's really most important to you. Again, this is personalized to you. And again, I only want you to put what's really important to your own personal identity. These are just examples that fall within these categories. But what you're creating one is a picture of yourself. Go ahead.
What if you don't identify with any of these things?
Then they don't go on your wheel.
I'm lost as to what might replace them.
Well, I think you can describe your own personality, I would hope, right? This is all exercises in self-awareness. Internal dimensions, aspects that are that shape who you are, that you can't change. So for me, race is a very important, race and the fact that my parents were immigrants, those were really, life-changing for me, right? They shaped my future. And so those are going to be a big part of my identity. It might not be as strong for other people. So think about things that kind of really affect who you are as a person. So you're saying nothing in any of these circles, or?
The titles all seem like vanity metrics by which you might judge other people, like somebody you were hiring, for example.
Right. I wouldn't use this for hiring, by the way. Let me just say that right now.
It just seems like a lot of checkboxes that need to be checked.
Yeah, no, these are just explanatory, for example. So the big things I want you to focus on are the headings, right? Your personality is who you are at your core. Your internal dimensions are aspects that you can't change about yourself. So that's why the examples are race, age, gender. You can't change those things. External dimensions, decisions you've made in your life that become a big part of who you are today. So the fact that you stood in front of this group and you told us you were a Bay Area native, I think, would you have said that if it wasn't important to you?
Well, to be fair, Roger said that.
Oh, that's true. Well, did you tell him, though? So it was important enough for you to tell him, right?
He found it on the internet.
Oh, did he? Where's Roger? Well, but that's just an example. Oops, sorry. That's just an example of the things that are very big part of who you are. The fact that you grew up in the Bay Area.
Santa Cruz is definitely part of my
There you go.
today.
Yes, absolutely. So I appreciate you asking the questions because I want to make sure that this is something that I explained right. It's something that's useful to you as a tool is to say, if I were to be able to create a visual of who I am as a person, what my identity is, this is just one way you can do it. Lots of different tools out there. Okay, anybody need more time? Okay, so I would venture to guess that every single wheel in this room looks different from the other, right? So you think about that, and you think about that in the context of a work situation, and what happens when people work together, and how you might, as a leader, need to orchestrate getting everyone to work together when they come from all these different places in their lives, right? So I have actually a few more upcoming workshops here, so around teams specifically, and then we'll get to one around your organization as well. But this starts with you, and understanding who you are first helps you figure out kind of where you stand in your own context, okay? So that's really why we did that. Next exercise. Let's talk about experiences. So you've heard, have many of you heard that the best way to learn is through experience? Have you heard that before? It's an adage now, right? Okay. So it's because the reason why, it's because that's how humans are coded. That's how life is lived and remembered, okay? So that's why when you talk about customer experience, employee experience, we're trying to frame it around experience because that's really more human-centered than, for example, transactions. So you think about customer service, it's more around transactions. Customer experience about what it's like to be a customer to a particular vendor, as an example. So that's what we mean by experiences, okay? So we're gonna take a few minutes to explore experiences. So what are the most important experiences that have shaped your life? And I created an exercise out of an interview question that a former Google executive tends to ask. Actually came out in an article in the last 2 weeks, but what she asks people to do is, if I were to tell you to write an autobiography, what would the chapters of your book be named, right? So you have a worksheet there. I think it's your 3rd page. It's just, again, a device to help you think through. If you were to write an autobiography of your life so far, what would the titles of those chapters be? Because those are the biggest aspects of your experiences. So take another 5 minutes to, did you guys find that in your books? Okay, great. Take another 5 minutes to think that through. We're building toward things here. Okay. Anybody else need more time? Done? Great. You guys are fast. You made it ahead of time. All right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about motivation, but in the interest of time, I'm going to give you a reason to go back to your papers after you leave today, okay? I'll explain this, but we'll skip the exercise so that we can move on. Let's talk about motivation. Who's familiar with this term flow? Well, anybody want to take a guess on explaining what it means to the room? Go ahead.
Flow is a highly efficient state where you, like, almost subconsciously know you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you turn like this and have output.
That's actually really, really good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. My definition here is a state of concentration so focused that amounts to absolute absorption in an activity. So very similar to your description. Everyone experiences flow from time to time. And its characteristics are people typically feeling strong, alert, in effortless control, unself-conscious, and at the peak of their abilities. Actually, you write about it in the book too. Shameless plug. All right, so the sheet that you have in the book is to think through those instances where you experienced flow and to pull out of them what in those moments of flow were the needs and the wants you were fulfilling in that moment.
For us or for others?
For yourselves, okay? So this is to get to thinking through what are your core motivations? What is it that you're motivated by? And it's important for you yourself to understand what is it that drives your own motivations, but it's also equally important for other people who are trying to influence you, what might motivate you as well. So I want you to distinguish between needs and wants because sometimes it's easy to confuse one with the other. So think about whether a want might be serving the purpose of a need. So let me give you an example. So succeeding as a startup, that may be a want. But fulfilling your need to be a high achiever, succeeding as a startup might fill that need to be a high achiever. You see how that links together? So we don't have time to go through that. I want to shave a few more minutes off of this to get to our very last exercise. But I want you to take some time once you leave here to go and revisit. I'm giving you a reason to go back and look through all this paperwork and to be able to think through that yourself. So start first where you have flow. I think that's where you understand your motivations the most. Okay? And then quick pop quiz here. Other exercises I could have put against this, but again, in the interest of time. You asked a question earlier about how others view you. This is kind of where I want to cover that. So how would others describe you? And that would be interesting to refer that to what you describe yourself at. What is the gap there and why? So take a few minutes. You also have a sheet for this where you can fill this out. Just a quick pop quiz. 3 short essay questions around how would others describe you? What are your hot buttons? And what are you working on? So when I started dating my husband, it was like 20 years ago, second day, I was like, these are my 3 hot buttons. Are those deal breakers for you? Because I don't want to waste my time. That's how I went. I was so clear about what my hot buttons were because I didn't want him, honestly, it's the worst thing because that hot buttons just set me off. So I was very upfront with him. What do you say? He's like, I'm in. But he still hits them from time to time. So take a few minutes, fill this out for yourself. I want you to understand that if you don't know the answers to these questions, don't feel bad about it. It just means you have to do some thinking and work around that. So that's the whole thing about building capability too, right? It's understanding where you are now and where you need to maybe spend a little bit more time. So if you can't answer these today, don't feel like, you can get there. Bullet points, yes.
What was all like, somebody that you know, almost like that high, that list of lot levels, that's like,
Like your pet peeves, you mean?
well, if I could just put all those attributes into one person.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, think of the person that bugs you the most. Is that what you're saying? What are all the annoying things they do? Yeah. So another minute. Yeah, so we're going to think about this question actually the whole night is what is it that you want to work on in terms of becoming a better leader? And so you'll have the personal development work plan here, that the template I gave you guys, but if there's anything right now that you're saying, I'm trying to be more healthy or be a better listener, or I don't want to give you the answers, but just think about things that you're aspiring to do better as a leader. Yeah. Who needs more time? Nobody? Good. So I could stop my timer here. Right. Now the next one's really important. It's your purpose. And what I mean by that is your personal leadership vision, and you also have a worksheet for that. Purpose is where you get your meaning. Okay? We are compelled to find meaning and motivation in our lives. Okay? We tend not to like to do things for no reason. Here we answer the question, why lead? Okay, so with your personal leadership vision, that's what you're trying to answer. So you want to start out with 3 leadership qualities or characteristics you would like to be known for. So it has to be 3 that you're not only comfortable with, but ones you can really get excited about. Okay, and then I want to also explain that there's 3 components. I'm going to have you draft your personal leadership vision. So let me just explain the 3 components of a good vision statement. One is I am and people see me as. That means envisioning how you want to be and perceived as a leader, and you want to be able to provide the focus and ground your efforts and behaviors. So that's what I am and people see me as. Getting authentic is increasing our ability to influence requires that we know ourselves and we can identify the specifics of who we want to be as a leader in order to be viewed as authentic and credible. Okay? And then the third piece of it is the process piece, right? So what is it that's going to take to create something that makes it concise and impactful and to become the piece that walks your talk? Okay? So I'm going to give you an example real quick and then give you a few minutes to draft your own personal leadership vision in your books there. So here's a good example. Take a second here can I get a volunteer actually to read it out loud?
Sure, I want to be known as a leader of change who seeks and considers all ideas, is open to being challenged even when I think I'm right, and once everything is considered, decisively moving forward with striking conviction.
Okay.
Good one.
Yeah, it's pretty good, huh? So what I want you to think about here is, what qualities they want to identify here. In this particular case, this person wants to be known for being considerate, decisive, and open. And in this particular statement, you can see where all 3 elements of envision, authentic, and process show up, right? So they're envisioning that they want to be a leader of change, okay? They want to be authentic, that they want to be the authentic piece is about being challenged even when I think I'm right, right? And the process piece is around moving forward with strength and conviction. So when this happens, I want to do this. So that's the example of a good leadership vision. So take a few minutes, write yours up. So start with your 3 characteristics, and then write a sentence or 2 that would describe your personal leadership vision. And I guarantee you that when you hire your employees, if you haven't already, you're going to get this question. So how are you going to answer it? All done? Good. So when you get to the stage where maybe an investor says, why should you lead this company going forward? What kind of leader are you? You're going to give them this, right? I'm helping you here. Okay, let me move on. So I guess after doing all this alone work, I just want to point out the fact that we don't live on a deserted island, if it wasn't clear to you already. Leadership is not just about ourselves. It's how we relate to the people and the world around us, which are all moving targets. So all of that influences our ability to impact as leaders, right? So whether you have empathy, what your biases are, the way you communicate, those are all also topics to delve into because they distort your perception and therefore your actions. We don't have time to dig in deeper to these tonight, but there is one model I want to demonstrate to show you kind of how you can, your own sense of self may sometimes betray you. Okay, so anyone read this book before? Leadership and Self-Deception. Okay, really simple concept. It talks about what self-deception is, and self-deception is this box. It blinds us to the true cause of our problems, and once blind, all solutions we can think about will actually make things worse. Okay? And it leads to self-betrayal, which is an act contrary to what I feel I should do for another, and the view of reality becomes distorted over time, may become automatic. So when we're in the box, we see others as objects. So this limits our ability to influence them. If we see people as objects and not as people, we can't influence them. Okay? So think about examples of leaders that you've come across that either just don't get it or they don't care about other people. Have you come across that kind of leader before? Yeah? So maybe they're self-deceived, right? But the thing is, what people don't realize when they're self-deceived, they don't realize that people can actually perceive these without being told, right? You know these leaders have huge shortcomings and they totally don't get it. They don't know that you know all the time. But we're all perceptive and we all understand that. So let me just talk about what happens when we see others as objects, right? We inflate other people's faults. We inflate our own virtue. We inflate the value of things that justify that self-betrayal. And the fourth one is really bad. It's blame. So what blame does is it invites others and encourages them to mistreat those other, like whoever you're deceiving yourself about, right? So blame is really very dangerous. So when we're all in the box, this is what we get. We get lack of commitment, engagement, and motivation. We get more conflict and more stress, big surprise. Poor teamwork and lack of trust. That's everything you don't want, right, as a leader. When we're out of the box, we see others as people. People with their own needs, their own diversity wheels, right, their own purposes, their own values. People follow leaders that work outside the box, right? So the example in this book that they talk about, really simple example, is the seat next to you, the empty seat next to you in the plane, all right? And there may be times that you say, you know, I don't want somebody to sit next to me, so I'm going to put my stuff there to discourage other people from sitting next to me. Right? That's seeing others as objects. It means your needs at that moment is more important than the person walking down the aisle who needs a place to sit or can't find where they're sitting or what have you, right? So I'm talking about Southwest flights where they don't assign seating, okay? Now, on the other hand, if you see other people, others as people, right, then you want to be able to move your stuff off that seat and say, hey, look, I know you're tired. You probably ran across the terminal to make this flight. Have a seat next to me. Relax, right? So that's a really simple example of what it means to be in the box versus out of the box, okay? So the same people that wrote this book recently wrote this book, which I can thank Amelia for giving me a copy of. Actually lending me. I'll get it back to you. And this is really a continuation of the previous book. It talks about what happens outside of the box, right? So they follow up with something called the outward mindset. So the big idea behind that is how do you shift from inside the box to outside the box? And they call that the outward mindset. So the two main ideas behind that is that going outside from yourself. You want to be able to look at people all around you. In this case, this is their graphic. They talk about managers, peers, customers, reports, and being able to look in each direction, see others' needs, objectives, and challenges, adjust your own efforts, and be able to measure the impact of that. So while the goal in shifting mindsets is to get everyone turned toward each other. So if you're leading this way, then other people are going to be more likely to lead this way as well, right? So the whole goal is to shift everyone toward each other. Accomplishing this goal is only possible if people are prepared to turn their mindset toward others with no expectations that others will do the same. But obviously you want them to. So I want you to take a minute. We're going to move on to the next module on capability, but take a minute to update your personal development plan. If there's anything we just talked about in awareness that you're like, I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, take a moment right now to write that. There's also, let me just go through that format real quick with you. Sorry for walking out of frame. The first page talks about what you want to learn. So 3 capabilities you would like to learn more about in order to achieve your own vision. But after that, the format changes. It talks about a current business challenge and determining what developmental goal is associated with it. So the challenge piece is whatever you're working on in your business right now, what capability that you want to develop to address that challenge, and how you hold yourself accountable to developing that. Okay, so take a minute right now, jot down some notes while it's fresh in your mind. I just want to give you an opportunity to do that before we move on. All right, so moving on to capability, let's talk about that. It doesn't just speak to your skills and knowledge. It's also your ability to apply them. So it's no good if you know how to do something and you don't use it, let's just say. Okay, so I'll provide you some helpful tools to up your leadership capability, but also spend some time about self-care and resilience, which speak to your own personal resources that you have to rise to the occasion when it comes to leadership. Okay, so let's ground this in your own situation. Again, this learning experience is really about making this relevant to wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Okay, so I want you to take a minute. I'm guessing you pretty much know what problems you're trying to solve and the opportunity you're creating with your startup. Probably know it by heart, right? Now let's look at the 2 big buckets that founder leaders must struggle with. The first is decisions, and the other is unsolvable challenges, and I will explain that, I promise. Both will influence your capability as a leader and the success of your business. Okay, so let's start with decision. Here's a dictionary definition, so we're all working off the same version, right? A decision is a conclusion or resolution reached after consideration. It's the action or process of deciding something or resolving a question, and it's a formal judgment. To illustrate, I'm going to take a guess at a scenario that you may encounter in your life, okay? Okay, did I guess okay? This is a decision, right? So there's a problem, right? There's a process and there's a formal judgment, like the definition says, right? That's a decision. Now I'm going to give you a tool on how to make a decision around this. It's called criteria. So criteria is a tool to help with the decision. It's also actually a tool I introduce in my book when it comes to being part of the culture building process, but it's useful in making all kinds of decisions. So criteria are the most critical needs and requirements based on a deep understanding of where things are and where they're going. So only you know that as the CEO and founder. Criteria are also established up front as the standard by which decisions are made, and it combats groupthink and selection bias. Now what I mean by that is, before you go talk to the first candidate, your engineer, and I'll give you an example. Levi and I had this conversation. Do you mind me just sharing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Levi and I were having this conversation. He asked me, I need to hire an engineer. I said, great, happy to look through my LinkedIn network, pull up people that are engineers. He's going through all the profiles, and he's talking to other people too, and he's saying, gosh, the more I talk to people, the more I'm changing my view of what I'm looking for, and I'm getting pulled in all these different directions. And the suggestion at that moment is, all right, before you make another call or have another conversation, sit down and lay out what your absolute needs are, your most critical needs are for this engineer, and then be able to use that to understand who's going to fit that criteria the most. So it takes the bias out of, and this is great for groups, by the way, too, is agree on the criteria up front. And that way, in groups, people tend to normalize toward each other, and so the most disruptive or innovative ideas get weeded out. You don't want that when you're trying to innovate something. You want to be able to agree on the criteria up front, generate those options or ideas, and then be able to measure them up. So this becomes your decision-making tool. Okay. So this sounds like theoretical right now, so I've created a worksheet for you in your books, and I call it How to Criteria. So you could take the scenario I gave you, which is hiring an engineer, or you could think about a big decision that you need to make. Okay? You lay out the scenario. Everyone found this page? Okay. Lay out your scenario. Come up with no more than 5 to 7 criteria. Generate all your options. And the decision is made on what best meets the needs of that criteria. Okay? It's not what you think. It's not what you feel. But it's where is it? And I'm not saying this has to be your only decision-making tool. There's literally thousands of decision-making tools out there that you can use. This is a good way of helping you take your own biases out. It prevents you from getting pulled in different directions, and it helps you to narrow down what are the most critical, the most important, not wants, but your absolute needs for whatever decision you're making. So take a minute to do that. I'll just give you literally 1 or 2 minutes to do that. And I know you're not going to have time to fill out, so just write down your scenario, maybe 1 or 2 criteria, and go back to it later. Any questions about this tool, Kaya?
Can you describe like one example criteria?
Levi, you did this exercise last week. Why don't you share with us your criteria?
I started to, so shame on me on that. No, I think one of the things that after we had that conversation I was able to reflect on was looking at my previous relationship with the health plan I had. And I think from there, what I really started doing is analyzing what I liked about like the relationship that we had. And now as I had a chance to kind of start this new chapter, what I would change, like what were the red flags or what new opportunities I could have in terms of finding this next individual. And so to me, like that's where most of this was grounded on. And so it's a little hard, I think, to kind of buy down to a couple of criteria, but like I think one of them was like having an understanding within the sector, right? I think when both of us came together, there's deep passion for different ideas. Like Emily at the time had passions for certain industries, and I had passions for other industries. And I think when we finally settled on the idea that we really wanted to work with, it was more towards the passion that I had for it. So I think finding now when I look at this next person, it's like, do they have a understanding of the problem that we're going after? And
Okay.
do they have a passion for it as well?
Does that help, Kaya? Okay. Right. Yeah, it's hard for me to explain because that criteria is special to you. I do give some examples of it based in culture. Okay, so hopefully this is a tool that'll help you. Maybe help you negotiate with when you're working with a team, instead of the loudest voice winning the day or the strongest personality, is to be able to agree on the criteria up front, and it becomes less biased, I'll say. I won't say completely bias-free, but it'll be a less biased way of helping you make those decisions, okay? So how would you balance these polar opposites or competing priorities? So what I have up here is delegate versus own, self or others, product or business or people, or efficiency and effectiveness. So how would you balance? Any thoughts around this?
I don't know how this fits into this model, but I'd love your feedback on it sometime, whether it's in this menu or another menu. But when you have like a really complicated solution and a market you're working on and you require
Yep.
I think it's really challenging because first you're framing what it is you're delivering, and then you're getting, legal, engineering, product, security, and everybody to say what their criteria is.
Yeah.
And I just think what I'm trying to say is that really understanding what it takes to deliver, I think is like a challenge for every organization.
Sure, absolutely. And so the challenge for a group like that, where everyone's coming from a different vantage point,
Yes.
is to be able to say, all right, how do we come up with just one set of criteria? That's the first exercise.
Yeah.
Because when you start to put the option in front of people, they're gonna want what they want,
Yeah,
and they're gonna
everything.
this whole self-deception thing, right? You're gonna use everything to lift up or value and devalue your piece, and then devalue everyone else, right? We just talked about that.
Yeah.
So getting them, the first exercise there is to be able to say, okay, 20 criteria across all of you. How do we narrow it down to 5 or 7? Like that 5 to 7 is my magic one number. I think it's enough to accommodate for complexity, but not too much that if you have too many criteria, it becomes impossible to meet them, right? So that would be my commentary on that. Any other thoughts about this? So the answer, let me just jump to the answer. The answer is that you need to have both, don't you? Okay, so that's why these are unsolvable challenges, okay? That's why they're unsolvable, because you need to have both, even though they may seem to be competing against each other or even opposites in some respects.
Is it really unsolvable, or do you have to strike the balance and go just it?
Yes, I'm getting to that. So these unsolvable challenges, and there's different ways to look at it, all kinds of thinking, but what I've chosen here is for you to think about them as polarities. And this is based on the work of somebody named Barry Johnson, and he wrote a book about this called Polarity Management. So we're getting there. Tell me if I don't answer it for you. But a polarity is an ongoing tension between interdependent, seemingly opposing imperatives. So these things here are imperatives. You sometimes have to take care of yourself and take care of others, right? Sometimes you have to focus on the product and the business, right? You can't ignore one at the expense of the other. But how do you do that? So I'm going to give you this tool to help you think through how you want to calibrate and balance that piece out. Okay? So I'm going to show you 2 ways to use this polarity. It's like this quadrant thing here. And you have them in your workbook as well. I'm going to show you 2 ways you can use it. The first way is to help you think through exactly what you're grappling with, right? So in the top left, so the one on the left is your first imperative. The column on your left is your first imperative. The column on your right is your second. All right, so in the upper left quadrant, you have to think about, well, what are all the good things about your first imperative? So what's all the great things about being effective? Okay, what's all the benefits of being efficient? Right, that's in the top right. Okay, what's the downside if you do one too much, right? So what are the negative consequences of the first one versus the second one? So map that all out so you know exactly what you're working with. And the second way that you use this then is to use it to generate the strategies in which you can actually leverage getting the benefits of both. So what strategies do you need to implement to be able to get the benefit of both? So, and stay above that line, because if you start to go too far in one direction, you're going to start to hit the negative consequences of that particular one. So spend time. This is like, again, we don't have time to do this, so I'm giving you the tools so that when you sit down, I gave you the blank versions of this, that you could sit down and say, what strategies do I need to do to be able to capture the benefits of imperative 1? What strategies do I need to do in order to hit imperative 2? How do I get both? Where is the downside of doing those? And where is that line? When do I cross that line and start to get into negative territory? And when you map that out, then you have an understanding of really how much do you want to calibrate. And it might be a strategic decision to say, you know what, we're going to choose effectiveness over efficiency. That's a choice that we're making. But that means we're accepting the downsides of the opposite, right? So does that help? Make sense? Okay. So you have this in your workbooks to try out. Let me talk a little bit about self-care, and that has to do with your personal resource, the resources you have. There's two ways to look at this. One is social capital. So in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, social capital is about making deposits and withdrawals. If you think about a bank account, these are the deposits and the withdrawals that you make with the people around you. So when you demonstrate understanding, you follow through on your commitments, you engender trust, you're putting more money in the bank with other people. And the aim, of course, is to put more in than you take out. Right? And emotional intelligence is what gives you a good idea of where you stand with people, right? The second way to look at this has to do with your own personal reserves, so your own bank account. So your ability to cope with and weather adversity. So things that energize us increase our psychological capital, right? If you're doing things that you love to do, you get more energized around them. Energy suckers, they make withdrawals. So you ever spent yourself in a way where you had nothing left to give? I can tell you that I did. I've experienced burnout, and really, I had no room for anything or anyone at that point. So when you make too many withdrawals, you are at risk for burnout, and that impacts your ability to make decisions, to use your capabilities, and to perform as a leader. So that's really important. I'm guessing not all of you have spent enough time thinking about that. Okay. So I want to make an important distinction between stress and pressure. You might think that it's the same thing, but it's not. Okay, they're different. Let me tell you what stress is. Stress is any demand for change with not enough resources. And in those cases, your goal is to just reduce stress. Reduce having too much stress. Okay. Pressure, on the other hand, are stressful moments in which the consequences and the results matter. So, for example, making your very first pitch in front of a big investor. That's pressure. Okay, and the goal in that situation is to be successful. So that's why stress and pressure are different. And no one is immune to either. Both of them are undesirable. Both of them provokes negative behavior out of us sometimes, and we all have this desire to handle them effectively. Okay, so it's nothing like stress to really understand who a person really is, because how do they perform when they're under stress? Do their values show, or do they fall by the wayside, right? So it's really important to ground yourself. And then this is, again, why I talked about values before I got into this section. So always pause and ask yourself, is this stress or is this pressure? Because while we can't control everything, you can control your actions and your reactions. And if you know that what you're experiencing is actually pressure, then you might be able to have a different strategy around it than you would around something that's stress related. Does that make sense? So again, I'm going to skip through this exercise. Again, I want to get through a few things with you before the end of the evening, and we're running out of time. But you have a worksheet in your book, and I want you to pause and think about what your psychological capital has been in the last day, week, month, 3 months average. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, are you feeling good? And I actually give you a little bit of math to do there, because if you average yourself out and you're, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're 5 or under, maybe you should think about doing something different. So it's 1 to 10, 10 being on the high side.
10 being high on stress.
No,
Or being
feeling good.
feeling good.
It's like your bank account. $10 is better than $0. Do a quick math on that. Okay. Let me give you this cure. The cure is resilience. So what's resilience? It's a renewable resource. Resilience is your ability to bounce back quickly. So how quickly you bounce back is your degree of resilience. And those who perform best when it comes to resilience are self-aware in the moment, and they adjust. They don't become defensive when they're criticized. They accept their reality rather than resisting it. And they find what's meaningful, and they show gratitude. And they're able to improvise, navigate, and make do until it works out. So there's a woman named Barbara Fredrickson who did some work on positivity. And her research showed that there's a 3-to-1 ratio. sorry. 3-to-1 ratio. What does that mean? It means 3 good things to offset 1 bad thing. She actually did research on that. So the next time you're thinking through your bad thing, try to offset it with 3 good things. Okay. I'm also going to just throw this up in front of you. You can take a picture of it because these are the things that you can do to demonstrate and build your ability to be resilient.
In that last example, was that just reminding yourself? Is what you're talking about? Three good things to
Yeah.
offset a bad thing.
Yeah.
Just reminding yourself.
Yeah, if you have a bad day, focus on having 3 good days. Yeah, because that research has shown that's how we recover from things. Go ahead.
Will you be sharing your slide deck?
I can, yes.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yes. I'll need your contact information. But yes, I can.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let me give you another use of the criteria tool here. So if you're brainstorming ways to be resilient, think of these 2 criteria. What will work for me and what will improve my situation? That's it, 2 criteria. And then be able to ask you these questions, yourself these questions to figure out. And those that really meet those criteria, that's where you best become more resilient. And again, that really depends on you as an individual. I can't tell you have to do this to be resilient. Some things are going to work better for some than others. Okay. So, your response, let me just make sure I explain these things to you because we all have challenges, all right? I'll give you some examples. Imposter syndrome, right? Burnout, social barriers, receiving feedback or criticism. Those are challenges that we come up on commonly. The thing that we can control, we can't control these situations or how they come to us, but you can control your response, and I'm sure you've heard that before. So you can reflect and learn in response to that. You can express gratitude. You can take action that's intentional. I've given you lots of tools here to become more intentional about your actions, and you can practice resilience and certainly perseverance. So things you want to ask yourself, what's going on? What are other ways to look at it? What have I learned? What am I grateful for? What's my good intention for today even? And think about when it comes to resilience, when your reserves are low, what gives you energy and how much you're willing to persevere. Okay? That's the difference between success and failure. I'm sure you've heard that before. Is how long people decide to push can sometimes make the difference. Okay? So, or you can ignore me and see what doing this leads to, right? So you get lack of awareness, you miss learning opportunities, you have an empty emotional bank, and you make a lot of efforts without a whole lot of purpose. So take a minute. I'm going to move into change. Take a minute to update your personal development plan. We'll talk about personal change and finish up for the night. So when we talk about this personal individual change, it's not about the clothes I wear today or driving up to San Francisco on 101 or 280, okay? That's not the change I'm talking about. I'm talking about life-altering change, okay? So, a lot of times, the changes that we go through have an impact not only on ourselves, but the people around us. And when I talk about personal, individual change, the root of that is internal to you. Okay, so even though it affects other people, the start of that change comes from within yourself. Okay? I have lots of materials around change in the team context and change in an organizational context, but what I will focus on tonight is personal change. Okay? So come to the other workshops. That's another plug. So here are all the things. These are the factors that are in play when you go through a huge personal change. Okay? Typically, there's that situation. There are triggers. So something that compels you to make a change in your life. Sometimes it's about the timing, and sometimes it's good timing or bad timing, but it's the timing. Sometimes it's the duration. And what I mean by duration is the length of time for that change to be fully integrated. Control is about the extent to which you are in control or not in control and how you react to it. Type, there's different types of it. There might be a change in identity, so that a change to the who am I question. There might be a change to autonomy, so that's your perception of control, whether that's real or imagined, it doesn't matter. Meaning making, it represents how you make sense of or find meaning in things. Self-efficacy is another one, your perception of your problems as solvable, and you being able to make a difference in that. Okay. Support, so what are the resources and the people around you in the midst of that change, and the strategies that you have to address or cope with that change. Okay, so these are the factors that are typically involved when you're going through a life-altering change. So let me give you an example, okay? You have becoming an entrepreneur. All right, so has that been life-altering for you? There's a handout there for you to think through each of these categories that brought you to a place that you decided that you were going to become an entrepreneur. Again, we don't have time to cover all of it, but I want you to just jot down a few notes there about what aspects of what I just talked about could have been in play when you decided to make such a big change. Because guess what? Not everyone does it, right? You're in this special group that decided that you were going to go out and you're going to change the world somehow in whatever you're building. And what is it that triggered that in ways that didn't happen with other people? So take a moment to think about that. Just give you a minute for that.
Is there a place where you can like show the summary of what the author?
Oh, sorry. Want me to pull up the... Okay. You know what? I don't know how to use Keynote very well. This one? Or you want the definitions?
I guess the definitions would be better, but I don't know if it's
Yeah, they're not in this
still
deck.
registered.
Just a moment to pause and get some feedback. Would it be more beneficial to you to get a summary as opposed to a copy of the deck? What would you prefer?
We like the deck.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, okay, let me just cover what I just said, because I did say it very quickly. Are there any questions around the definitions? To your point, Amelia, is there anything that you wanted me to repeat?
It's okay, I don't want to.
Strategies. So what are the actions? Oops, there's your minute. What are the strategies or the plans or your reactions or your plans for reacting to that change that's happening? Okay, so when it comes to individual change, just so you know, there's an emotional journey that comes with it. This is also in the book, and it's not mine. It was developed by somebody named John Fisher, and he talks about the emotional journey of change. And there's 4 distinct outcomes and key turning points. All right, so this is where I want to use my pointer here. So when change starts, there's a certain degree of anxiety. You ask yourself, can I cope? There might be a honeymoon period where you're happy for a change before the rubber meets the road, and you understand that there's an impact to the change. That might trigger fear in you, which might lead you to experiencing anger or a threat. You might feel all these emotions here end up in a place where you become hostile. That's one path. Another turning point, it might come to asking who you are, and you might realize that that change may change who you are, but it might be for the better. You might get to gradual acceptance and moving forward. That's obviously where we all want to go when it comes to change. But if we turn off a little bit too early and we become insecure about whether or not we measure up to the new circumstances, we might end up having disillusionment. Or like some of us in our lives, we might have denial. We might not acknowledge that the change is happening at all. That change will still happen, by the way, but you might be less prepared to deal with it. So this is just an illustration of understanding that you will go through an emotional journey when you go through change. It's your choice on which path you take. But you have an understanding now of where that goes and how it happens. Okay?
Sorry, it seems to be, you've got the negative downturns, but what about the people who are like the Bill Gates, who become successful? Did they ever reach a point where they were going, is this really me?
Yeah.
Am I capable enough to be this? And what are the next steps? Nobody's done this before.
Right.
How do I get there? What's the path?
Yeah.
Some of those.
I would venture to guess, and I think I even have some materials that show there are those moments where they have to ask those questions. And again, the point is, how do you choose to respond to it? Because we all have those moments, right? We'll all encounter them. We might not choose when they come. But if we understand what we're going, this is where self-awareness is really important. Because if you understand your emotional state, what's going on, then you can figure out a way to respond to it a little bit more intentionally. Yeah, so you see how all this connects all together. But I would imagine that, and I'm pretty sure there's lots of materials out there of those moments where these people that we admire, these leaders that we admire, had moments where they could have gone the other way, and they chose not to. And what are those pivotal moments, those key decision points, where they decided to have a different response?
Seems like Jeff Bezos.
It might be, yeah.
I said it seems like Jeff Bezos' character right now. It's a bad joke. Bad joke.
Well, I would question, is the self-awareness there? All right, so just in the home stretch here, we want to, the whole thing, and again, this is tying everything together and weaving it all together that we've covered tonight. But what do we do when we go through change? We want to learn from it, and we want to learn from experience. So that's the other aspect I want to cover for you. So change comes with learning. And there's a quote here, to learn from experience, people have to slow down their thinking process so they can critically assess it. And that's something that we tend not to have time for, but it's so important to learning. So, so how do we do that? We do that by reflection, using reflection. So reflection is another form of paying attention. It's central to every phase of learning through experience, and it helps people to make meaning from their experience. So inevitably, reflection leads to learning. So if you're not reflecting, you may not be learning. And what I mean by learning, the way I define learning is through change behavior. So it's not accessing new information and knowledge, and that's it. Learning is, I've encountered new information, and as a result, I'm behaving differently because of that. That's learning. Okay. So when we encounter that new knowledge, we behave differently, right? So see how that all works together between reflection, learning, and change? It's all working in tandem with one another. So take out your cameras for this one. Because this is how you reflect. This is one way of reflecting, is actually asking a whole lot of questions of yourself. 3 phases: observe, think, and learn. You want to be able to dig deeper. They call that double loop learning. So it's not about just going once or twice. It's actually going back over and over again to understand really and processing, making meaning with what's going on. So this is one way of looking at reflection. Another way of looking at reflection is kind of putting your situation in the middle and walking around it 360, okay? So this is a learning model. It's arranged like the cardinal points. So north, south, east, and west, also in the book. You go clockwise around the circle. So you start by encountering a new experience here in the middle, and you go around the circle. See how that works? So to take a situation, break it down with these prompts. I'm guessing you don't take a whole lot of time to think about this, and so what happens is then you're missing opportunities to learn as a leader. So when important things happen in your life, you got to sit down and reflect so that you can get the learning out of it. There's a key capability when it comes to being able to learn. It's called learning agility. So it's an essential leadership attribute. And the way it's defined is the ability to remain open to new ways of thinking and continually learning new skills. So one of the things I've done, and you know those big conferences when they have these really big important people sitting on the stage and they do their fireside chat, and then sometimes they let a mic pass around, right? So one of the things I tend to do is to, if I'm feeling it, I'll ask for the mic and I'll get up and I'll ask them. I'll say, okay, now that you are where you are, the apex of your career, what's left for you to learn? What are you doing next? And I can tell you that many times they don't know how to answer that question. They're thrown off by it because they're not thinking about it. And that's a limitation, because to be able to learn, become lifelong learners means that you're going to continually improve as a leader. Lots of different models out there, but the one I trust most is something that comes with the Burke Learning Agility Inventory. The head of my department at Columbia, somebody asked me during dinner, were you influenced by your graduate education? Yes, absolutely. This is recent work that he's done. And I know that it's good because I know it's research-based, and it's not that somebody made it up. I know that the work went behind it, and he identifies two components of learning agility. The first is skill. So it's what you do when you don't know what to do. That's what he calls skill. And the other is motivation. Again, we covered that tonight. It's the willingness to take risk in novel situations. So he identified 9 dimensions of learning agility, the most powerful being flexibility and speed. All of these can be developed through behavior. Okay? And it's also notable that learning agility is a prerequisite for innovation. It's a key skill in future-proofing oneself. So think about that. You have a sheet in your book around learning agility. We're going to take a behavior-based approach, incorporating your reflection, your planning, your practice, and experimentation with new behaviors. So what you have here is I gave you the dimensions, what you've done, so reflect back on how you've demonstrated these, maybe without even knowing it, what I've seen others do, and what you might do in the future. What you don't see here is a 5th column, and it's how you might inspire others to become agile learners. That's leadership. So, you out of breath? Okay. So what I'm going to do as we finish up here is I'm going to do our closeout before we do our last exercise. Okay? So the objective here was to leave here as more knowledgeable leaders than when we came in. Did we meet that objective? Please tell me yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Great job.
Thank you. I wasn't asking for accolades, but it does feel nice.
Hold up the book.
Oh, hold up my book.
Good job.
Thank you. It's called Culture Your Culture, Innovating Experiences at Work. You can find it on Amazon. And I will sign books. I might even have my book plates with me. Anyway, you have 3 Post-its that were stuck on the back of your workbooks. Do you have those? Okay, good. I just want to make sure. So let me finish up with a couple of comments. So why do you think Unhackable showed up in the title of this learning experience? Because hopefully now you are a different, better leader, one that isn't faking their way through leadership, and one who has experienced that no one can take away. Okay, that's what makes it unhackable. So, as we finish up here, I'm going to give you a few things. I want you to be able to, I'll explain the Post-it debrief in a second. I want you to make sure that you take time to complete your personal development plan. And again, it's not the framework, it's just the actual journey of you going through that is the important part. I want you to also implement any learning you may have had today, anything that stood out, and to engage beyond today. So in that spirit, I have a QR code here. And thank you, Levi, for this. I have created a QR code, and I've blocked away some time over the next couple of weeks where I designate an hour each day for 2 half-hour sessions with anybody that wants to have conversations either about this or about their specific situations. And of course, that's free of charge. I just want to be able, I didn't have a chance to get to know everybody here tonight. So I want you to be able to have that conversation with me after. And I've already talked with you about having a coffee potentially as well. So I invite you to take a picture of this QR code and feel free to schedule that time with me. And as it relates to the Post-it notes, you have 3. I want you to write 1, 2, and 3 on each of them. So one Post-it note is for what stood out to you. So this is feedback I need from you. So what point, conversation, tool, or concept stood out for you? The second Post-it is what feedback do you have? And the third is what else do you want to learn about? So that'll be good feedback for me. And I do apologize. There's so much I wanted to share with you, and I sped through a lot of it. I had this choice between doing more with less time or fewer things and digging in deeper. But I feel like I really wanted to give you an understanding of the breadth that goes into leadership, particularly in the startup context. Who knows, this may end up being the second or third book. But I want you to be able to at least have a sense of what you want to explore better. So I wanted to just give you more options, and that's why I did what I did tonight. So the third Post-it is what else do you want to learn about? So the first Post-it is what stood out to you. Second is what feedback do you have? And third is what else do you want to learn about?
What else do you train on?
I'm an organizational psychologist, so I have a pretty broad background. I do a lot around culture in particular, do some coaching as well, organizational change for sure. So, but you don't have to tailor it to me. I'm asking you, so answer it from your perspective. Yes. Okay. Yes.
I have one question around the culture piece.
Yes.
You started out by talking about the fact that culture really starts with the leader.
Yes.
But when you're working with teams, you find that in terms of making culture explicit, how to engage with teams is it important to have like real team sessions focused on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big part of the work that I do. And there are some people in this room even that have had that experience of where they're more intentional about the culture they're trying to build. Because here's the thing. There's a tendency for founding teams' personalities, use Flash, to create the culture based on their own personalities, right? Right. So we have these cult of personalities. I don't know what's going to happen to Tesla when Elon leaves, because everything is built around his one personality, and it's a huge part of their culture. Whether that's intentional or not is anyone's guess, but absolutely, yeah. So when a founder's identity is inextricably tied to the identity of the company, that's a business risk. And so it's really important for a company, especially an early one, to be more intentional about what they want to be, not just because that happens to be the personalities of the founding team. Yes, that's where the team dynamic starts, and that's why I work with some founding teams around that, so that they're more intentional about it. But the worst thing is I pissed off a startup founder once because we had coffee, and his thing to me was, I don't dictate culture. I don't do anything with culture because I don't want to dictate it. And I said, well, I hate to break it to you, but by not doing something, you are doing something. And he was not happy about that. But a year later, he hired a culture person, so I guess I was right. Yes. Yeah, it happens, right? Okay, so last thing. Have you guys finished your Post-it notes before I explain? Because I'd like for you to pass those to me, if you don't mind.
And the cards.
Yeah, you can leave the cards on the seats. That's fine. The last activity, I want to get you out of your seats. Can you come to the front of the room?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's going to be feed forward. Who's done this before? Nobody? Feed forward? Okay, 2 lines in front of each other like you're speed dating. Bring some of your materials with you from today, too, if it helps. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.